Welcome to the FNF Victory Road Draft League Team Builder video. In this video, I'm going to go through the three most common and fundamental archetypes of Pokemon teams and break down their components and hopefully provide kind of like a hands-on guideline or checklist for you to build a Pokemon team that fits under one of those archetypes. Most teams fit under one of these archetypes to some extent. There are mixtures, of course, but knowing these archetypes is really valuable for playing and knowing how to structure a team and how other teams are structured too. So hopefully this benefits you. I did make a team building video last season, but that was more of an overview. This is going to be a little bit more hands-on. So I do hope you enjoy it, and take a look in the description below for timestamps if you want to go to a certain archetype without watching the whole video. So without any further ado, let's begin. We're looking at team building for different playstyles, and these playstyles are Hyperoffense, Balance, and Stall. And we are going to start with Hyperoffense. Now you might think that Hyperoffense is just gathering a bunch of strong Pokemon together and wailing on the opponent. Yes, but it's not that simple. It's kind of that simple, but it's not that simple. So we're going to take a look at Hyperoffense. I would say it is the most basic of the three playstyles because the game plan is pretty straightforward, and I'd say that the roles are really straightforward too. So your goal for Hyperoffense is breaking through the opponent's team quickly and maintaining offensive pressure and momentum at all times. So you never want the game to slow down. You are trying to break through no matter what. You are punching holes in the opponent's team so that you could set up a sweep later, and we'll go over how to set up a sweep. But there are some distinct roles. It's not just gathering hard-hitting Pokemon, because there are different types of hard-hitting Pokemon, and the support Pokemon on hyper-offensive teams is very, very important. So we're going to take a look at the support Pokemon, and we're going to see how offensive Pokemon are actually broken down generally into three different types for hyper-offense teams. So the four important roles for hyper-offense, the first is support. Support is very important with Hyperoffense, and you really want to get support Pokemon doing their thing as soon as possible. The reason for this is because these support Pokemon are going to be providing conditions that allow you to sweep, and you don't really have a lot of defensive Pokemon, so you want these conditions to be set up right away. You can't really stall for time on Hyperoffense teams. You want the battle done as quickly as possible. So these are typically lead Pokemon. They set up early to provide opportunities to the rest of the team immediately. There's different types of Hyperoffense support. The three common types in Hyperoffense are Hazard support, Screen support, and Weather support. And you actually can run all three on one team. I don't really recommend trying to run all three on one team if you're not familiar with Hyperoffense. It is possible, but the one that I 100% recommend that I think is crucial to Hyperoffense teams is Hazard support. Hazards provide chip damage or lower the speed of the opponent. In the case of Stealth Rock and Spikes, it's providing chip damage. In the case of Sticky Web, you're lowering the opponent's speed by 1 whenever they switch in, unless they're not on the ground, so like they're flying type or levitating. This is extremely important because when you're sweeping, there might be some Pokemon that you do, let's say, 90% to instead of 100%. It's very common, actually. If you have Stealth Rock up and it does 12% to that Pokemon when it switches in, a 2-hit KO becomes a 1-hit KO. And that is very favorable for you when you're doing Hyperoffense, because you want everything essentially to eventually become 1-hit KOs. And that's because your Pokemon are frail. You don't want to exchange hits. You want to just attack, take things down, and not get hit at all. So that's why Stealth Rock and Spikes are very important. They make 2-hit KOs become 1-hit KOs. They also Break, Focus Sash, and Sturdy, because Sturdy and Focus Sash only work when the opponent is at 100%. And Sticky Web can make you outspeed some Pokemon that you normally wouldn't outspeed, or that are holding Choice Scarfs. So hazards are extremely important to Hyperoffense. I can't emphasize this enough. Screens give temporary defensive support to your Pokemon. So we're talking about Light Screen, Reflect, and Aurora Veil, which provide Light Screen provides special defense increase, Reflect provides a defense increase, and Aurora Veil provides both if you use it in Hail for 5 turns, 8 turns if you're holding Light Clay when you use those. This allows your Pokemon to be bulkier than they normally are, so they could set up a move such as Swords Dance, Dragon Dance, or Shell Smash, for example, without getting one-hit KO'd. So this provides another opportunity for your Pokemon to try and sweep. Finally, there's Weather. And Weather is usually used to power up certain moves. For example, Rain powers up water moves. And also to activate abilities, again using Rain as an example. Swift Swim doubles a Pokemon's speed in the rain. So that also allows a Pokemon to outspeed things and it normally wouldn't outspeed. You typically want your lead to be fast, and you want it to really be able to set up right off the bat as soon as possible and then segue into a different Pokemon. The reason I put Klefki as the picture here is because Klefki actually has Prankster, and that allows it to use status moves such as spikes and screens first, or rather it increases their priority. So most of the time you'll be going first, and that's very valuable for Hyperoffense teams because you could go before being taunted, you could go before getting hit, and generally you could just set up maximum layers of spikes and screens. So Klefki is a good example of a very effective Hyperoffense team supporter in what it can do. I believe it also can go for a Rain Dance too, so there you have it. There are other support moves that set up conditions for your team to sweep. Wobbuffet is a great example of a good supporter for Hyperoffense because it could come in and use Encore. Encore will trap a Pokemon into a move that you could take advantage of, switch into, and then go for a boost. That's something that actually Pitiful Punching Bags in Season 2 did quite a bit. For example, using Wobbuffet to trap a Pokemon into a useless move and then setting up Shell Smash with Barbaracle. Memento also provides a switch-in opportunity while lowering the opponent's attacking stats, again allowing you to set up. Defog can remove hazards, which isn't very good for you. I would recommend Rapid Spin more on a Hyperoffense team if you're going for hazard control. But if you're using, for example, Volcarona or a Focus Sash user like Shiftry in the Sun, you're definitely going to want to make sure that no hazards are on your side of the field. Taunt is very nice for Hyperoffense because it could prevent foes, especially in stall, from using moves like Will-O-Wisp, Thunder Wave, and even setting up their hazards. Trapping is basically what Wobbuffet does with Shadow Tag. And then Sleep, of course, can again provide opportunities for you to set up. Basically, when you have a support Pokemon on Hyperoffense, your question is, how can I set opportunities for the rest of the Pokemon on the team to sweep easier and to set up easier? So that should be your goal with support Pokemon. Very important glue to Hyperoffense teams. On top of our support Pokemon, we have Wall Breakers on Hyperoffense teams too. They punch holes in the opponent's team that help aid in sweeping and cleaning and remove problematic defensive Pokemon. So some Pokemon are really tough to deal with that a sweeper might not be able to deal with. And we'll go over what a sweeper is later. But for example, A Pokemon like Hippowdon can be really hard to deal with. So a Wall Breaker is here to just hit extremely hard, and it benefits a lot from screens, I'd say, because they're typically not as fast as other offensive Pokemon on Hyperoffense teams, but they are a little bit bulkier. So these Pokemon are more likely to be able to take a hit, but they're not sweeping. They're just punching holes through the team, and they're making it so that you have more momentum and you're forcing switches, because if Hippowdon doesn't want to die to, I'll give a different example, a Tapu Bulu using Wood Hammer, it's going to have to switch out into something else, and that Wood Hammer is going to hit pretty much anything hard. So these Pokemon are really good in punching holes in the opponent's team, and this is the second part of setting up those favorable conditions to sweep. Wall breakers are not sweepers, but they help sweepers by weakening the team so that sweepers come out later and then go for their sweep. So what is a sweeper? A sweeper is a Pokemon that sets up a boost, and then they try to take out the other Pokemon on the team. They try to take out as many as they can after their boost, and they can act as a win con, aka win condition. So you can build a team around a sweeper, and that's pretty much like, this is how I win, by getting this Pokemon to be able to set up and sweep. Cloyster is a great example of a sweeper because it could use Shell Smash to raise both its attack, special attack, and then also its speed. And after a Shell Smash, it's incredibly fast, it hits incredibly hard, and if the opposing team has been weakened or defensive Pokemon that check Cloyster are removed or severely weakened, then Cloyster could just go for a sweep. So these Pokemon, they definitely rely on boosts, so you want to make sure that you have conditions set for them to boost one time. You could achieve these conditions in a multitude of ways. Again, screens can help you boost their defenses to achieve these conditions. You could use Yawn, you could use Memento, you could use Encore, or you could attach a Focus Sash, for example, to one of your sweepers. It really depends on what you want to do. But yeah, these are Pokemon that just wreck the other team after a boost. And then finally, Cleaners. Cleaners are kind of like sweepers, but they require the opponent's team to be more weakened, and you're usually saving them for the end. They also don't require a boost. So these are fast, offensively capable Pokemon whose purpose is to finish off a weakened team. So after the Squeakers have wreaked their havoc, after the Wall Breakers have punched holes through the teams, and it's starting to become the end of the game, your Cleaners are there to clean up, so to speak. They don't rely on setting up. They immediately, right off the bat, go fast, and they finish off the opposing Pokemon. So speed is extremely important for Cleaners. They're usually frail and fast, and so they want to pick off the opponents before getting hit because they're so frail. Megalopony actually isn't that frail, but other Cleaners such as Weavile, for example, are very frail. So priority for this reason is also useful, such as Fake Out for Megalopony, Ice Shard for Weavile. These Pokemon you'll see in the late game trying to just finish things off. So those are the three different offensive types of Pokemon, plus a support Pokemon. An important thing to note is that you want offensive synergy. So offensive Pokemon should be able to take an attack from a wide variety of Pokemon types, and both, to attack from a wide variety of Pokemon types and both physical and special attacks. So to have good synergy, which means your team fits with each other, you want to build some offensive cores. These are teams of Pokemon that could handle each other's checks and overall switch into a wide amount of Pokemon combined. So Tapu Koko and Kyurem Black are a great example of offensive cores. Tapu Koko being a really nice cleaner, and Kyurem Black also being a really nice wall breaker. So Tapu Koko can also be a revenge killer, which is kind of like a cleaner, but just for one particular Pokemon, not necessarily at the end. So Tapu Koko struggles with grass types, bulky grass types to be specific, and so Kyurem Black could actually come in on those grass types and then proceed to set up or punch a big hole in anything that tries to switch in. So that's an example of good offensive synergy. On top of that, Tapu Koko typically in Gen 7 hits from a special standpoint. Kyurem Black hits from a physical standpoint. So you're also hitting on both sides there too. So you want to build dynamics like these, where Pokemon are able to handle each other's blind spots, so to speak. Tapu Koko also can benefit Kyurem Black by attacking bulky water types, for example, which Kyurem Black might struggle to break through. So that's pretty much a rundown on Hyper Offense. Here's our checklist. You want to make sure you have your support Pokemon, wall breakers, sweepers, and cleaners. And since in Victory Road Draft League you have 12 spots, it would be good to make sure you have at least 2 of each of the above archetypes. That's 8 Pokemon, so you still have room for more. For the attacking ones, you should try to include 1 physical and 1 special variant for roll. So 1 physical wall breaker, 1 special, 1 physical sweeper, 1 special, 1 physical cleaner, and 1 special, at least, for each one. And this gives you maximum versatility, have different types, obviously. And yeah, it's pretty simple to build a Hyper Offense team, but it is important to know the distinctions between the different roles. So finally, when you're done building your team, ask yourself these questions. Can my team hit on both the physical and special side from various types? Meaning, can you hit specially from electric? Can you hit physically from ground? Can you hit specially from fire? You know, different types and different physical and special variants. You want to have as much as possible. Can your team effectively set up hazards and screens consistently? So is your support Pokemon fast enough to set up before it dies? Usually on Hyper Offense teams, you're not setting up hazards multiple times in a match because the matches are very short. So that one chance you have to set up hazards sometimes could be your only chance. So you want to make sure that it's used correctly and have fast hazard setters or reliable hazard setters. Beware of taunt. Taunt can ruin your hazard setting, and then it could be very hard for you to gain momentum. Does my team have options to pivot or remove hazards if needed? So do you have U-turn and Volt Switch users? Like we said earlier, Tapu Koko can Volt Switch, so it could kind of double up in that role with Revenge Killing and Volt Switching, for example. And if you're running Pokemon like Volcarona or Charizard who don't like coming in on Stealth Rocks, do you have a Pokemon that can remove Stealth Rocks if you need it? This is if you're running a weather team. Does your team function under your chosen weather effectively? So if you're running sand, do you have sand sweepers? Do you have sun sweepers if you're running sun? Do you have Pokemon that could handle other weathers as well? Maybe a common thing actually on Hyper Offense weather teams in draft is to get 2 weather setters, so you could reset your weather turns when you need to, and then go into your original weather instead of having to wait out. So that's also something to consider. Also, like if you're running a sun team, don't have like a water type sweeper because then your water types get powered down. Things like that. Does your team have good speed tiers? This is really important. Do you have fast Pokemon? If you're running Hyper Offense, you want to have at least 1 Pokemon that's above 130 speed. At least 1. You want to have some Pokemon that could boost their speed. You want to have Pokemon that can utilize Choice Scarf. And you want to have, if you're running Weather, Pokemon that double their speed in Weather. Very important stuff. Hyper Offense definitely relies on speed. And then on the flip side, do you have a way to deal with Trick Room? Because Trick Room, not commonly seen in ladder play, but it is common in Draft League comparatively, especially versus Hyper Offense. Trick Room can really ruin your strategy if you're going for speed. So taunting a Pokemon before they could get a Trick Room up, just being aware of who the Trick Room users are, realizing what a Trick Room team is and trying to counter it. These are all important things to know when you're running a Hyperoffense team in League. So that's it for Hyperoffense, and we're going to move on to the Stall archetype now. And Stall has a bad rap. A lot of people hate Stall, but guess what? It's a viable playstyle. It's like, don't hate on players who use Stall. Like, I'm tired of seeing, like, oh, you hate players who use Stall, how original. Like, just don't. I've heard it so many times. But Stall is basically, it's whittling your opponent down over time. And admittedly, in Draft League, Stall isn't too good because there's so much counterplay to it. So typically people who run Stall are going to want to run semi-Stall and not full Stall. But I'll give you the description for full Stall, and then you could incorporate elements from Balance and Hyperoffense as you see fit. So again, Stall is whittling the opponent's HP slowly over time using passive damage such as status and hazards. And this playstyle is pretty complex, I'd say. There are a lot of different roles and things to be aware of because you're not the one applying offensive pressure and keeping the pressure to yourself. You're trying to take whatever comes at you and survive over time while at the same time making it so that you can't be broken through and that they're being chipped over time. So I'd say that Stall is a pretty complex playstyle. And there's a lot to be aware of if you're running Stall. So let's go into these important roles. There's quite a few. Some of them can be combined, but we'll take a look at each one individually first. So for Stall, you definitely want hazard setters. Hazards are very important in Stall, just like in Hyperoffense, because they're crucial in doing chip damage to your opponent. Basically, you want your opponent to switch out many times. You're always switching in Pokemon that they can't break through, so they have to switch out and switch out and switch out. And over time, the Stealth Rock and the spikes that they keep switching into is going to be what brings them down. So, Stealth Rock, spikes, and Toxic Spikes are the hazards of choice for Stall teams. You're not going to really see Sticky Web on Stall teams because there's not really Stally Sticky Web users outside of maybe Araquanid, and I think, and and speed doesn't really matter that much to Stall because your Pokemon are generally not going to be focused on speed. And compared to Hyperoffense, your Stall hazard setter has to be ready to set hazards multiple times as needed. It's going to be a long drawn out battle, and if the opponent removes hazards, you need to be able to set them again. So Ferrothorn is a really good example of a bulky Stall hazard setter because it could set both Stealth Rock and Spikes, which can both be very useful to Stall. It also has good defenses and can set up Leech Seed, which is even more chip damage. So Stall really likes Ferrothorn. An important component to Stall, the backbone basically of Stall teams defensively, are walls. Walls are extremely defensive Pokemon that can take multiple hits throughout the course of the battle, and typically they can recover on their own. If they can't recover on their own, they need to receive wishes from a cleric, but typically walls can recover on their own. At least good walls can. Walls exist physically, especially, and mixed, but usually they excel in one or the other because you're going to be forming a core usually between physically defensive and specially defensive Pokemon. So Gliscor is a really good example of a physical wall. It has really nice typing that lets it take a multitude of physical attacks, and it can roost and then U-turn away if a special attacker comes in. It could defog, it could set up Stealth Rock. It just has a bunch of things it could do, but it's a really good wall. Status setters are Pokemon that inflict status on the opposing Pokemon, and typically you're going to go for burn and poison. You don't want to go for paralysis that much. You can, but you're usually better off using burn and poison because they inflict damage over time. Poison inflicts more damage than burn, but burn benefits you by making the physical attackers of the opponent's team hit weaker. So it makes it even easier for your walls to come in on your physical attackers. And Amoongus is a really nice status setter. It can set Toxic. It could set Spore too if it needs to. On stall teams, I'd say that Toxic is more valuable, but against a Pokemon that is immune to Toxic, Spore can be a really, really good option. Status Absorbers, on the other hand, are Pokemon that come in on status moves to render them useless. So these are Pokemon that don't mind being statused, or they're immune to them, or they could get rid of them easily. Natural Cure, for example, on Chansey, means that every time it comes in and gets poisoned or burned, it could switch out and heal. Poison types, of course, being immune to Toxic, and then special attackers or bulky Pokemon that don't really mind being burned can come in on a burn, or Milotic, who loves being burned because of Marvel Skill. So those are your status absorbers. Hazard control is also pretty important too in stall teams. These are Pokemon that remove hazards, prevent them from going up, or prevent your own hazards from being removed. So you could remove hazards using Rapid Spin or Defog. Usually Rapid Spin is better on stall teams, but Defog works really well just because the distribution is better. So either one could work. Rapid Spin preserves your own hazards, and Defog removes yours as well, so be aware of that. You could also prevent hazards going up by using Taunt and Magic Bounce. Also Magic Coat to an extent. And then also the hazards you want to keep up. So you could use Ghost types to prevent opponents from using Rapid Spin. Just be aware of which Pokemon on your opponent's team have Rapid Spin. And you could have a Pokemon with Clear Body, White Smoke, an ability like that, and that prevents the use of Defog. So that's also pretty useful too. Taunt could also prevent the use of Defog as well. So clerics are very important to most stall teams, and Chansey is the face of clerical ability in stall. Of course, there are Pokemon like Alomomola who can also fulfill a clerical role, and you want to heal the HP or cure the status of the rest of the team, and you do this by using Wish, Heal Bell, and Aromatherapy. Healing Wish to an extent too, but you generally don't see that run on stall. And these should also be Pokemon that are walls. They should be sturdy Pokemon, and they should have large HP stats like Chansey and Alomomola to heal often and most effectively, because Wish is based off of your own HP. A Pokemon like Chansey will be able to heal very nicely. Phasers and Hazers are also very important Pokemon in stall teams. They use moves that force the opponent to switch out. In draft, stall teams are pretty predictable because you could see them, so you could plan for them. And generally, it's easy to find plans that screw over stall teams. And one of those things is taking advantage of how passive stall teams are. Since they're not hitting hard, a lot of Pokemon are going to try to set up on the stall teams. They're going to use Dragon Dance, Swords Dance, Nasty Plot, Shell Smash, moves like that. So to prevent them from setting up and going for a sweep, you're going to want to use Phasers and Hazers. Phasers force the opponent to switch out using moves like Whirlwind, Roar, and Dragon Tail. Not only does this prevent sweeps, but this also racks up damage from hazards, and it could also bring in an unfavorable Pokemon for the opponent. Hazers, on the other hand, remove any stat changes from active Pokemon. This also prevents a Pokemon from setting up. Let's say toxic damage is doing a lot to a Pokemon and you want to keep it in, you could use Haze. Clear Smog is another option if you want to remove stat boosts on the opponent, but you fear taunt. So that is also something to take into consideration. So not every stall team needs these, but these are other useful roles that stall teams can benefit from. Stall breakers are Pokemon that are effective at facing other stall teams, and they could shut down other stall teams. Mega Sableye is the best example of this. It fits on stall teams, but also beats other stall teams by using Taunt and with Magic Bounce. So Magic Bounce prevents any status, and it's just generally really bulky. Unaware Pokemon are kind of like phasers and hazers in that they can prevent sweeps, but simply by existing. So their ability Unaware ignores boosts that the opponent have accumulated, and they could wall Pokemon if they amass boosts and stop sweepers in their tracks. And then finally, Trappers can trap and remove problematic Pokemon to the team. Usually Wall Breakers are the Pokemon that you want to remove. Doug Trio is a really good example of a Trapper that could benefit a stall team. It isn't defensive in itself, but it could remove problematic steel types that resist Stealth Rock, are immune to poison, and generally can be a nuisance to stall teams. So that's also something to consider for your stall team. Finally, we'll take a look at defensive synergy as a concept. Defensive Pokemon should be able to switch into a variety of types and both physical and special attacks. And to achieve this, you're going to want to form defensive cores. These are teams of Pokemon that can handle each other's checks and overall switch into a wide amount of Pokemon combined. So they... also, it's really nice if they're not weak to hazards and they can't be poisoned. For example, the team below, Celesteela and Mega Venusaur, both can't be poisoned, both aren't weak to hazards, and they cover each other's weaknesses really well. Celesteela doesn't want to get hit by electric moves, Venusaur can come in on that, and then Venusaur doesn't want to get hit by psychic and flying moves, Celesteela could come in on that. They both can Leech Seed, they both are very bulky, Venusaur can recover, Celesteela can also attack some problematic Pokemon, and overall, they just are a really, really nice defensive core. So you're going to want Pokemon like this that cover each other's weaknesses on your stall team. So here's your checklist. You're going to want to have hazard setters. You're going to want to have walls, status setters, absorbers, hazard control, clerics, and phasers. And again, in Victory Road, since you have 12 spots, you should have at least 4 walls. 2 physical and 2 special. Even more is better. But yeah, you should have at least 4 walls. And note that the roles can be combined. You could have a Pokemon that's a wall, a status absorber, a status setter, and a cleric all in one. And Chansey actually fits that bill, for example. It's a wall, it could absorb status and then switch out. It could toxic Pokemon, and it could cleric, and it could provide a clerical role with Wish and Heal Bell. So keep in mind that stall roles can overlap as well. Finally, when you build your stall team, you're going to want to ask yourself these questions. Can my team defend both the physical and special side from various types? Can my team effectively set up hazards consistently? Remember, you're going to want to be able to set up hazards multiple times in a match, just in case they're removed. Does my team have options to remove opposing hazards? So do you have the ability to rapid spin or defog hazards that your opponent sets up? Can your team heal itself and last well over time? So how many Pokemon on your team can recover? How many of them are going to want to receive wishes? Do they synergize well with your wish setter? Does my team have a way to deal with other stall teams? This would be incorporating a stall breaker just in case. Does your team have a way to deal with setup sweepers? So do you have phasers and hazers? Do you have an unaware Pokemon? Do you have a Pokemon that can prevent Pokemon from setting up? And does your team have a way to deal with Taunt? Taunt is a very, very bad move against stall teams. Well, it's a good move against stall teams. It's bad if you're running the stall. So you need to make sure you have a way to deal with when the opponent uses Taunt, because it could completely shut down a stall team if you're not careful. Especially on a Pokemon like Gengar, who could, for example, shut down Blissey and Chansey. So Those are questions to ask yourself if you're running Stall. Remember, Stall is a very hard archetype to pull off in Draft League. I'd say it's the hardest of the three in terms that there's so much counterplay in Draft for Stall. But don't let that discourage you or think negatively of Stall, because it's a valid playstyle, and it could really be interesting seeing how matches go from a defensive perspective instead of an offensive one. And then finally, we're going to move on to Balance. Balance, in my opinion, is the best archetype for Draft League, because Draft League definitely appreciates versatility, and Balance is pretty much the versatility archetype in Pokemon. So Balance pretty much combines qualities from Hyperoffense and Stall teams to make a team that could fulfill both offensive and defensive roles. And this playstyle is really reliant on switch-ins, predictions, and playing safe. So you're definitely going to want to keep switching, because you're switching between offensive and defensive roles. So you're going to want to pivot a lot, and you're going to want to predict a lot as well. Obviously, for the other styles, you want to predict too, but this one I'd say is the most prediction-heavy playstyle of the three. So you'll notice in these important roles, there's some roles from previous archetypes, and again, we're getting from those other archetypes to be able to build our balanced team. So a balanced hazard setter, one for example like Mew, is a Pokemon that can set hazards and is also versatile. They can fulfill defensive, offensive, or utility roles depending on what you need. So Mew could set up Stealth Rock, but it could also hit hard from a variety of types. It could pivot with U-turn or Volt Switch. It could recover. It could be defensive. It could status. It could do a bunch of different things. So Mew is a great example of a versatile hazard setter on a balanced team. You usually wouldn't want a Pokemon that just sets hazards and goes down right away, like Hyperoffense teams, but your Pokemon doesn't need to be as wally as a Stall team. So just a Pokemon that could reliably set up hazards and then do other things too is really good for balance. On the flip side, you want hazard control, and I'd say hazard control is the most important. Balanced teams, like the least important. For balanced teams, setting hazards is the least important, but I'd say controlling hazards is the most important, because on balanced teams you're going to be pivoting a lot. Pivoting is a crucial part of balanced teams, and so having a hazard controller is beneficial to avoid chip damage on your team. And a hazard remover that's relatively bulky and can pivot is a good option. So Serena is a good option. Gliscor again is a good option. They could both pivot, and they're relatively bulky and can remove hazards. You could also use a Ghost type, a Taunter, or a Pokemon with Clear Body to prevent Rapid Spin and Defog from being used from your opponent. And then a really cool thing to use on balanced teams are Pokemon like Bisharp and Braviary, who have the ability Defiant. You could also use Competitive to punish defogs. So if you think that the opponent's going to go for defog, you could switch in and then get a free attack boost, which is really good for you. So pivots, very important for balanced teams. They provide an important role in scouting, chipping the opponent, and controlling momentum all at the same time. By scouting, I mean you're gathering information of what your opponent is running and how they play. And this is very important with balanced teams, because balanced teams want to be able to adapt to how the opponent plays, even more than Hyperoffense and Stall teams. Obviously, you want to do that for all teams, but especially balanced teams, because you have the ability to do both offensive and defensive roles. So pivoting is extremely important on balanced teams, and I recommend you have at least 3 pivots or more. So you're going to want to go for U-turn, Volt Switch, or Parting Shot as some of your pivoting moves. And there's 2 kinds of pivots, actually. There's slow pivots, which can bring in frail offensive Pokemon safely. This is when you pivot second, so you're already hit by a move, and then your Pokemon comes in, you get a favorable switch in, and you're not hit by anything. And then fast pivots, you pivot first, so you use the move first, and then you bring in a defensive Pokemon that can handle whatever is out. So Rotom Wash is a good example of a pivot because it could do both, and it could also fulfill offensive and defensive roles on a balanced team, depending on what you need. So, really solid Pokemon, and a really nice pivot. Wall breakers. We see wall breakers again, just like in Hyperoffense teams. They punch holes in the opponent's team that help in sweeping and cleanings or remove some problematic defensive Pokemon. And again, they're bulkier than Pokemon that are sweepers or cleaners, but typically slower. And they build momentum for balanced teams. Balanced teams really do enjoy wall breakers because you're typically not going to go for as much sweeping as a Hyperoffense team would go for. But a wall breaker hits hard no matter what. And if you could pivot into a wall breaker into a good matchup, like you turn into a wall breaker versus something that can't harm it, you could really do some big damage on whatever switches in. Stall breakers, also really interesting and important Pokemon. Not as important as a wall breaker, but a stall breaker basically prevents stall teams from operating as they usually want to by using moves like Taunt. So they could be a big nuisance for stall teams because they're not prepared to take down teams if they're full stall without using chip damage usually. So Crobat's a really great example of this. It's fast, it could taunt, it could defog, it could roost, it could super fang, it could U-turn. It has just so many stall breaking tools, and it's versatile. It could be bulky, it could be a cleaner, it could do a lot of things. So Crobat's a very good Pokemon for balanced teams. You're going to want to pick up a stall breaker if you see a lot of people running stall. If there's not a lot of people running stall in the league, it's not as important to stall break. But if you pick up Crobat as a stall breaker and you don't need a stall breaker, there's still a lot of other things Crobat could do. Sweepers are next. They set up to boost, and usually they're setting up their power, their speed, or both, and they could act as a win con. Again, as balanced as pivot heavy, pivots should look for an opportunity to bring in these sweepers once a team is weakened enough. So you're basically pivoting, and then looking for an opportunity to bring in a sweeper such as Mega Altaria, who's relatively bulky, can usually take a hit, set up a Dragon Dance or two, and then go for a sweep. So that's a typical balance sweeper. Walls and tanks. So unlike most full stall teams, you're not going to be as reliant on walls, and balance opens the doors for tanks to be used. Walls and tanks are a little different. Walls are extremely defensive Pokemon that could take multiple hits throughout the course of the battle, and tanks are also defensive Pokemon, and they could usually take multiple hits, but they also have the ability to attack decently as well. So they're not as reliant on just defending. Walls can kind of drain momentum because of their passivity, but tanks usually don't drain momentum as much because they could also hit pretty hard too. So again, you have physical, special, and mixed tanks, and Snorlax is a good example. It's a good special tank. It could take a lot of special hits, boost, or just go for some strong returns. And then finally, utility Pokemon. As balance is very centered on its versatility, these are also versatile Pokemon that are capable of fulfilling a wide variety of tasks based on what the team needs in a particular matchup. These are extremely valuable Pokemon on balanced teams when drafting, as versatility is one of the best features of a balanced team in draft. And again, being able to run so many different things and not be predictable is great. So Jirachi is a great example of utility Pokemon. It could go for a physical set, it could go for a special set, it could be defensive, it could wish, it could trick, it could paraflinch, it could set up screens, it could just do a bunch of different things. It could pivot. Excuse me. So that's what I mean when I say utility Pokemon. Just a Pokemon that could fulfill a bunch of different roles. Other roles include things like knockoff. For example, maybe setting up hazards. It's not a dedicated hazard setter, but it can set up hazards. So that's what I mean when I say utility Pokemon, and usually you're going to want to have at least one of these on your balanced teams. So finally, synergy for balance. Balance cores could fulfill both offensive and defensive roles sometimes at once, and of course you could have different cores. You could have defensive and offensive cores on your balanced team, but usually balanced teams are cores are a little bit tankier. They do, like other cores, cover each other's weaknesses by attacking and defending versus each other's checks. So a good example is Heatran and Tapu Bulu. Tapu Bulu could come in on earthquakes that threaten Heatran or water moves, and then Heatran can eliminate the Pokemon that are problematic for Tapu Bulu, such as steel types and other grass types. So these Pokemon can hit really hard, but they also are rather bulky. They're not super fast like Hyperoffense cores, and they're not only dedicated to defending over time like Stall cores would be, but they can do a little bit of both, and we see that in Landorus Therian and Rotom Wash too. Again, they cover each other's weaknesses, and they can pretty much do both. They could defend, they could attack, and they could pivot, which is really important, with U-turn and Volt Switch respectively. So balance cores kind of tend to combine the framework of hyper-offensive cores and stall cores into Pokemon that could attack and defend at the same time. Of course, they're not purely the specialists. They're kind of more jack of all trades, so they don't attack as effectively as an hyper-offense core would. They don't defend as effectively as a stall core would, but they could do both, and they could do it quite competently. So here's your checklist for a balanced team. Hazard setters, hazard control, pivots, wall breakers, a stall breaker, sweepers, a wall or tank, and utility. And this is like the most loose checklist of all of them, because you can really incorporate other things too. The only things I really recommend are at least 3 reliable pivots and at least 2 wall breakers for a balanced team. I really recommend at least 1 or 2 utility Pokemon. Aside from that, you could really decide what you want to do. Like, it's flexible, so feel free to incorporate a cleric if you want a cleric, or a cleaner if you want a cleaner. This is the most like not set in stone. You could decide whether you want to lean more towards offense, more towards defense, what you want to do. And that's the beauty of balance, and that's why I think balance is so good. So finally, some questions to ask yourself if you're running balance. Do you have Pokemon that cover each other's weaknesses defensively and offensively? Remember, you want to do both. Can your team effectively set up hazards? Does your team have options to remove opposing hazards and also protect your own hazards? Does your team have a way to deal with hyper offense teams and stall teams? This is an important one. Can you defend reliably versus hyper offense, and can you break through stall teams reliably? You want to be able to do both. Do you have effective utility Pokemon that fit in with your team? Jack of all trades Pokemon that have a lot of uses. Do you have options both to defend and attack? And do you have a variety of speed tiers on your team? This one's important too, because you're going to want some fast Pokemon, you're going to want some slow Pokemon actually to take advantage of Trick Room, perhaps if you're facing a Trick Room team, or if you yourself want to utilize Trick Room to ruin hyper offense teams. You probably want some Pokemon that could boost their speed just in case. So you're going to want a variety of speed tiers. You don't need all your Pokemon to be fast. You definitely don't want all your Pokemon to be slow. So then finally, that's the balance guide. Finally, we're going to move into general questions to ask yourself. So overall questions to ask yourself. First of all, do I like this team? It's really important to like the team that you're using in Draft League. If you don't like it, you're going to get sick of it. You probably won't put as much effort into team building, and you're not going to have as much fun. So definitely make sure you have a team that you like. And the next question, am I comfortable using the Pokemon on this team, goes hand in hand with that. Maybe you have more of a defensive playstyle and you're using a Pokemon that's frail. Maybe try to find a Pokemon that's a little bulkier. Or maybe you have an offensive playstyle and you're trying to use a Pokemon that doesn't have a good offensive presence. Try to find a Pokemon that is a little bit more offensive. Am I missing anything on this team? If so, how could I fix that? So this is an important question to ask yourself. Step back once you have a team in mind. Take a look at it. Make sure you have all your components. Think of things that you want to have on the team. And if there's something missing, try to make adjustments to include that. Is there a type that my team is vulnerable to? So you could actually use the type calculator that Noob Scrub on the server has made for Draft League. It calculates how many weaknesses and how many resistances on your team you have to each type. And I will link that also in the description below. It's really, really useful, and I recommend using it. Is there any way I would like to improve this team? Again, take a step back, take a look at it. If there's anything missing or anything you want to add, see if you could improve it. If you have leftover points, for example, maybe you could afford a higher tier Pokemon that's a little bit better than a Pokemon on your team. So finally, we're going to take a look at drafting. These are just general drafting tips. So first of all, you're going to want to identify key Pokemon. Which Pokemon are absolutely crucial to your team concept? These are the ones you're going to want to pick first. So if you're building a stall team and you absolutely need Mega Sableye for stall breaking, for being a physical wall, for being a ghost type, if you absolutely need that and you don't have any backups in mind, then put that Pokemon first for your drafting order, because other Pokemon that aren't as important or easily replaceable, you don't need to get them right away. So that goes hand in hand with this next point. Know which Pokemon have backups if they get sniped. Identify the role that Pokemon plays and what tools it has to perform that role. And then find another Pokemon that you could choose if your preferred pick is taken. So if a Pokemon has a lot of backups, you could draft that later. So for example, Crobat is a very good stall breaker for balanced teams, but Golbat also works very nicely as a stall breaker for balanced teams as well. Not as well as Crobat, but it still does its job, and it could be used as a pivot as well, for example. So if your purpose of getting Crobat is as a stall breaker, then you could use Golbat, and that's a backup. It's also cheaper, so you could kind of put Crobat on hold since Golbat will be available to you. Versus a Pokemon like Quagsire, for example, there's not a lot of unaware Pokemon, so there's not a lot of backups for Quagsire if you want it for unaware, so that's something that you should get early if that's something you're planning on getting. A general rule of thumb, you should draft higher tier Pokemon early, especially popular ones. This includes Megas. We all know that Pokemon like Landorus Therian, Mega Pokemon like Mega Lopunny, Mega Alakazam, Pokemon like Kyurem Black, they could all be very popular Pokemon because they're so good. So if you want them, try to get them as early as possible because they won't last long, most likely, if you don't draft them right away. And then finally, be aware of other people and what they draft. If one certain kind of Pokemon is being taken fast, and this you see a lot with fairies and steel types, prioritize drafting that kind of Pokemon because you might be stuck without good options. So you definitely want to have a fairy type usually, at least for balance and stall teams. So for example, if you see Florges is getting taken, Sylveon is getting taken, Clefable's getting taken, that's already 3 really good fairy clerics gone. You might want to jump on that bandwagon and get a fairy before all of them are gone, or most of the good ones are gone, and you're going to be stuck with a Pokemon like Wigglytuff. No offense to Wigglytuff, but I love Wigglytuff, but it's not as effective in its role as, say, Sylveon would be. So just be aware of what people are taking and move things up in priority if your backups are being taken or certain archetypes are being taken. On the flip side, if you see a lot of things being taken that you don't want, like for example, if you see 5 weather teams being formed, you could pick up a Cloud9 Golduck, for example, to deal with weather. Or maybe you could get your own weather setter just to counter the other weather teams, since it's such a common archetype in the draft. So also be aware of that too. So in general, those are my drafting tips, my team archetype team building guide. I hope that you enjoyed this and you got something from this. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask me. I know that there's a lot of different roles and they can be kind of confusing, so I tried to simplify it to the best of my ability. But if you want examples of what Pokemon fulfill what role, like for example, what are good hazard setters, what are good walls, I encourage you to look that up. But if you're having trouble deciding, feel free to ask me or any of the other organizers or anybody in the chat, for example, on their opinion. It's always good to ask questions and to look things up. So don't be afraid to look things up and ask questions and just try to learn more. And take a look at some other teams from previous seasons and try to identify what their archetype is and how they functioned. And that could help you understand these archetypes more. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this. I hope this acted as a nice sort of like checklist and kind of workshop for you to be able to build your teams. And the way I recommend using this is like go to the team archetype you want, pause for each role and try to find Pokemon for those roles, write them down, and then maybe build your team from that pool of Pokemon, or heavily consider those Pokemon. So yeah, thank you very much for watching, and I hope you enjoy Victory Road Draft League as much as I do. Season 3 is coming up very soon, so stay tuned for that and all the announcements for that. Until then, I'll see you later. This is Noel, and you'll see me in Season 3.